Hey berries, welcome to the season 2026.2 patch notes and tier list for supports. If you don't know who I am, my name is Bizzleberry. I make a lot of support guide and video content onto the YouTubes. I'm currently sitting at around about 450-ish LP in Master at the moment on EU solo queue. I feel like I've done, I think it's around about 100 games of solo queue. So I've got a decent grasp of the kind of current meta that's happening right now. But as always, my tier lists are kind of catered towards people that are just starting all the way up until like Platinum Emerald. If you're beyond that, then you don't need a tier list. Just play what you're being good at. But this is for people that are just getting back into the game, into the season, and kind of want to pinpoint on a few champions that they want to lock in. So this patch goes live on Thursday, the 22nd of January, and it will last 2 weeks, I believe. In the actual patch itself, there aren't a huge amount of changes. The only direct change we'll talk about is Boundle Pipes, which is a new support item that got released for season 2026. We'll talk about it. And we'll talk about some of the items that they did introduce and my opinions on them, and how it has potentially affected the support meta. The overall changes, so there is one thing I want to mention. They are changing, I think it's going to be next patch, this support quest usability. It hasn't personally affected me, but apparently it's been affecting some of you guys, where basically what happens is with the support quest, when you complete that, like kind of as normal from previous seasons, you now have that control ward extra like little pouch, which is bound, at least for me it was bound on V, which was also bound to a different ping command. I had like 1 or 2 games where I accidentally put down a control ward instead of doing the back off ping. But they're now making it so that you can either rebind it, and I don't think it's going to be coming into this patch. So next patch, they will have it so that your control wards go into that pouch anyway, from like level 1, so that it's not like special towards into that quest, which is quite nice in a way, in terms of like being able to see and continuity throughout the entire game, rather than the control ward just like suddenly switching around like that halfway mark in the game, really. So yeah, I approve of this. It's not really a buff at all or a support, that you're not really going to be filling up your inventory like that anyway. So yeah, it is a welcome convenience kind of change there. But yeah, as I said before, there's no actual support changes coming through. There's a bunch of buffs and nerfs to other roles and champions if you care, but nothing really impacting the support role, including the AD carry changes. But this is the main one. Basically, Boundle Pipes was too cheap, so it's going from 2,000 to 2,300 gold. I agree with this change. I think that maybe 2.3k is slightly too much, maybe putting it down to like 2.2k. I will say though, I don't think Boundle Pipes is OP. I'm going to go against the grain here. It might be an unpopular opinion, but I think it is overrated. The best way I can explain this is like, if you're popping Boundle Pipes, so if you're doing crowd control on an enemy champion, you are getting movement speed, but no one else on your team is. But everyone on your team is getting attack speed. So yes, this works nicely if you have like auto attackers that are doing well on your team. So it's kind of like a tank ardent sensor. But the movement speed specifically only applies if you're doing crowd control. And if you're doing crowd control, 9 times out of 10, apart from like some special circumstances like a Leona ulti, you're pretty much already involved in the combat anyway. So it's not like, basically like movement speed as like a tank is useful to get into a fight. Usually it's not useful to have the movement speed inside the fight, if that makes sense. The only kind of use that I kind of want to potentially try in and see how it feels is with like a phase rush Alistair, because he's going to be going in, and he's like one of the few tanks that he kind of also wants to get out as well, because there's nothing he can do. His cooldowns are too long for any more crowd control. So I feel like the interaction there could be quite interesting with the movement speed in terms of like getting out. But yeah, I feel like the item, I'm still like leaning overall towards like Locket, especially with the amount of burst that's in the game right now. The burst is like kind of crazy, and I'll talk about that in the tier list as well. But burst, overall the assassins and some items there are kind of crazy, and Locket really does help against burst. So I think Bandle Pipes for now is a little bit of a bait, but I don't know. I'm happy to be proven wrong. There's some messages here like the synergy between Diadem of Songs, which is like the new tier support item, and Echoes of Hylia, which also got changed recently, is very cool. I'm gonna be honest here. I think like Echoes of Hylia is once another item that is getting overhyped. I think Echoes of Hylia is actually kind of bad. Echoes of Hylia as well. Diadem is kind of bad, and Echoes of Hylia is generally not that great. There are some specific circumstances that Echoes of Hylia is fine to play. I did actually quite like going Echoes of Hylia first on Sona, and then just going into like pure mana regeneration rather than just skipping the Diadem. But overall, like Sona is the best user of Diadem and Echoes of Hylia combo if you do want to go that. I tried Diadem and Echoes on other champions, and honestly, I kind of stopped because I just hated it. The amount of like enchanters don't have mana issues outside laning phase, and by the time you were to like pick up a Diadem of Songs, right, and convert that from the Whispering Circlet, like the amount of mana, flat mana you're getting there is completely pointless. Like it's just wasted stats because you could be getting mana regeneration, and then when you pick up Dawncore, you're going to get added benefits from that anyway. I think the healing on the Diadem overall is kind of bad. So you're just basically getting it for like infinite mana, but you don't need infinite mana by the time you get to mid game as an enchanter because you just don't have mana issues anyway. So it's a really strange item, in my opinion. I honestly think it's just kind of pointless. Yeah, that's just me. I mean, the mana draining hog is Sona, and even if you have enough area charms anyway, you shouldn't really have many mana issues. If you are, then Diadem is fine, but like overall mana regeneration is kind of OP on supports. If they ever nerf mana regeneration, like, or reduce base mana regeneration or per level mana regeneration on a lot of the supports, then Diadem will become more viable in my opinion. But I think Diadem is overrated. But that's my stance on the new items at the moment. I feel like a lot of the supports kind of have the same item builds as previous season. Like Moonstone is still solid. Dawncore is still solid as like a item finisher, like it's your second or third item. Imperial Mandate once again only kind of works on Nami. Echoes of Hylia I feel like doesn't work on like Melee really now. Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. I think like the identity of a lot of these support items are kind of just like meh. And I wish Riot almost just makes it so like some of these items can only be bought if you're in a support role, and just kind of like augment them even more towards kind of what they would envision the item being, so that it won't be OP if you were a mid lane or a top laner to pick them up, in my opinion. But anyway, let's go hit in the tier list. So I will say, like, if you've been finding stuff that has been working in the 0.1 patch, so the previous patch, you're probably going to be fine here because there aren't that many changes directly to supports apart from the bundle. I'm going to kind of skip through the tier 4 and tier 5, but I'm going to just let you like have a look at them because, you know, there's lots of random champions there, especially like in the tier 5. One thing I do want to mention though is, let's say two things then. So Senna is one that I want to kind of potentially keep an eye on. She is a hard mechanical champion to play compared to other support champions. I think Echoes of Hylia, I know I just kind of slated it a little bit, but Echoes of Hylia first item on Senna is a potential interesting build. That is worth maybe having a little look at. Another one there is Brand. I'm gonna be honest, guys. AP supports this season so far, and honestly, at least for the majority of the previous season, are falling off pretty badly. There are no new AP support items. I noticed that once again there's that gimmick with like the Echo Zahilia with the diadem stuff. It's just TikTok bait. Just don't fall for it. If you're gonna play AP, just buy the normal AP items and just pray that you're getting kills in order to be able to stay ahead of the curve of the game. But the main problem, once again, as I mentioned earlier, is that burst, particularly bursty assassins, are pretty meta at the moment. I know generally like they are in the meta, but the damage is just particularly high at the moment in the season. So if you are a squishy immobile mage like a Xerath, like a Brand, you're gonna have a tough time. You really just are. And I wouldn't really recommend it. Mel, actually, I'm gonna say, Mel's another champion that can work, but she. Two things. You guys that are playing Mel support in bronze to plat, like, have literally the worst win rates I've ever seen in my life. So maybe don't play her anyway. And then secondly, she is getting a revamp next patch, and it does seem potentially a little bit more support orientated. So eyes on Mel into the next patch. Alright, moving up to tier 3. Some maybe more higher play rate supports there. Let's talk about Zyra. Zyra is basically the highest, the best AP support, really, the best true AP support that you can play at the moment, and it's only at tier 3. She's the best in terms of, like, you know, her damage output is respectable, her crowd control is respectable, immobile, so gets burst down pretty easily. If you do badly in lane, she falls off pretty hard, and you're probably locked into just doing like Rylai's first item. And because there's generally just everyone's kind of going squishy anyway and just going into that burst meta, like even going stuff like Leandries and things like that just feels kind of bad because you're not getting as much value from it. So yeah, Zyra at the moment just feels pretty bad, and I don't recommend it at all as someone who does enjoy playing Zyra. Karma. Now Karma's an interesting one because she does have a strong laning phase, particularly if you're pairing up with another poke champion like a Kaelin, for example. But she does fall off like a truck, even if you go into pure Enchanter, like in the mid game onwards. Once laning phase is over, just Karma in general does fall off massively. That's always been the case, but for some reason it feels maybe a tiny bit more like that this season. So yeah, Karma's like a bit of an iffy one at the moment. And then you got like something like that, like Lulu. Lulu did receive a lot of nerfs last season. She is okay if you do have an AD carry that you're playing with. That is particularly good. But that would be personally the only time I'd play Lulu. I think there are better enchanters than her. And I'm going to be personally honest, actually, I don't think I've even done a single Lulu game this season just because of the better enchanters in tier 2 and tier 1. They just kind of do her job better and just provide more utility than her. So, yeah. Moving up into tier 2, we've got 4 champions there. We've got Soraka, who was previous tier 1 and moved down into tier 2. You've got Leona, Morgana, and Janna. Now that Morgana 1 tier 2 might be slightly too high. I'm basing it off my own games at the moment, and I have been incredibly surprised at how well those Morgana games have been going. One slight theory is that Black Shield in this kind of current meta does feel a little bit broken, purely because of how much damage there is going out. If you're a squishy assassin and the only thing you're weak to is crowd control, well, if you have a black shield on your face, you're not getting crowd controlled. So there's been definitely like cases of that. If it had like AP Nunu jungle, well, I just put the black shield on, they're rolling down. Well, you can't interrupt that, can you? So he just keeps rolling down, and then it's just a nice clean engage. And So if you're able to pair up with maybe like a Poke 80 carry, and you have like an assassin or like a Nunu, for example, that I just mentioned, to put that black shield on in order to facilitate engages, or like even in the mini skirmishes just to protect your assassins, she's actually really, really good. One thing I will say though, I really, really do highly recommend going Glacial Augment rather than Arcane Comet. I think Arcane Comet is a bait. You don't really need that in lane for damage. The catch potential of the Glacial Augment is way better. Plus, if you are playing against an enchanter and if they have a brain, if you're going up against a Morgana, you should probably be picking up on Michael's. Michael's is that cleanse item to get people out of like the binding, for example. But like if you're running Glacial and their support Michael's the binding, they're still going to be stuck in the AoE slow on the ground. So it should still enable follow-up crowd control to happen on that target. So it's Glacial Augment is absolutely broken on Morgana and severely underused in my opinion. So do that. I think Soraka is a really good pick still, but she has fallen down a notch just purely because the burst is higher, so she is a bit more vulnerable, and also she won't necessarily get as many W casts off unless she's like ahead of the curve by a good chunk and has lots of heal and shield power. Keeping people topped up can be very dangerous and difficult to do. She's still like one of the strongest enchanters though. Like the heal power healing she does is pretty insane. It does force the enemy team to buy a lot of anti-heal. If you're like the only healer on the team and like your team has no self-sustain, the enemy team are still forced to buy anti-heal, which means the enemy team are being forced to spend like 800, 1,600 gold, etc. Maybe even more just to try and mitigate your healing, which just by picking in Soraka is pretty hilarious. And then on top of that, you've got Silence, which is particularly still good against assassins. So you've got the burst you're having to deal with, which sucks, but Silence is actually really good against assassins, particularly champions like Katarina, Kassadin, LeBlanc. If you know that they're coming in and you put the Silence on under them, it stops them from dashing around, blinking around, etc., and can really mess up their rotations as well. So the Silence is like super underrated as always in my opinion. It's like one of the strongest crowd controls in the entire game, especially because it's like instant on the ground as well. So yeah. Leona's a solid tank. She definitely was a user of the bundle pipes. Yeah, nothing really else to say about that. She is just one of the best tanks. There's still actually one better tank to her than play, but she is like, if you're looking for someone that wants to engage and go in, Leona's the best kind of engager in the entire game at the moment in terms of the support role. And also like the massive lack of cooldown, should I say. Her ult cooldown is crazy low. So even if you like throw down your ulti and you miss, just back up, re-engage again in like 60 seconds, which is pretty low for a support ultimate. And then you'll be able to try and make something happen next time. Janna's generally always been like tier 1, tier 2. I think disengage right now is really good. I mean, disengage generally is always pretty good, because usually it's just like the enemies are... The main way to kill the enemy is just let them outplay themselves. Which sounds stupid in a way, but like, think about how many times people have tried to tower dive you or AD carry and failed. And just imagine like if you're playing Janna and how much easier that would be just to make them like goof under tower and things like that. Like the amount of enemy misplays that are made just because they are the ones making the play. And Janna is a great champion at punishing stuff like that. Morgana's also quite good at that too. And there's also a better enchanter than Janna to punish stuff like that too. But it's just... You're luring them to come in, they goof, they mess up the engage, maybe your crowd control them makes them mess up the engage, and then they're kind of like isolated in weird situations. So Janna is a pretty stable pick still at the moment. Now going up into the tier 1, my kind of favorites at the moment, we've got Milio, Nami, Sona, and Brom. Sona is probably the, like, if you do like the diadem in particular and the Echoes of Hylia, like Sona is #1 user of those items. I don't think there's anyone else that really kind of compares with diadem on Sona, if completely honest, and maybe even potentially Echoes of Hylia. But there's been some outlier cases of like Bard doing quite well with Echoes of Hylia, but generally it's Sona is the most stable person with Echoes of Hylia that yeah, it's just generally just basically Sona. Who do I want to talk about first? No, so we already talked about Sona. Let's talk about Braum. So Braum has kind of the properties of Janna, but in tank form. And from what I've noticed in solo queue at the moment, the strongest champions are generally auto attack based rather than caster based. So we're kind of looking at like Vayne. Vayne's got a new build right now where it's like mainly tumble based, off of her the Sheen item Stormrazor. So she tumbles in, autos, and then backs out. Braum's really good at like mitigating that because that can do a lot of damage. Yunara is also another really good champion. Philios. Those kind of champions that are either wanting to go in to do one really big hit, or lots of multi kind of hits that are just honestly doing quite a lot of damage anyway. Braum's Wall is like really, really good at mitigating a lot of damage. Plus, you got really good disengage with your ulti, and then if you really want to go in, you've also got tools to do that with your Q or your ultimate again. You can kind of, Braum's ult is better as like a secondary engage. So like, for example, the most basic one would be like Malphite ulting in, and then you do your ulti on top of that to kind of like AoE knock up people. Doing Braum as like as the actual engage is pretty difficult unless you get a good Q land or you're like flanking around the angle, which isn't great because then you're not backing up your AD carry to do a shield. So try, if you're going to pick Braum, you kind of need like some auto attackers on the team to better help apply a passive. And ideally you have at least one other engager to follow up on, because then you can like W dash to them as well and then reposition nicely for an ult to overlap. I wouldn't recommend playing Braum if you're the only engage on the team. Nami is very, very stable at the moment, very generic enchanter. She kind of fills everything but not particularly excelling in any one particular thing. Heals are pretty decent. The E damage and slow is pretty decent. If you're able to land a bubble, it's pretty amazing. And if you have like disengage and once again a secondary engage on your ultimate, a bit like a Braum in a way. So I feel like really the key this season is having a champion that has disengage. If your champion doesn't have disengage, I think that's what's going to stop you from being tier 1 right now. In this because of the assassins. As always with Nami, you don't want to just randomly chuck out your Q, your bubble. You want to like get your slowdown, so apply that with your E, or do your ultimate to like knock them up, and then do a quick bubble overlap to then just get the guaranteed bubble. Really good. And then you got like maneuverability as well with your passive and putting on people as well. So yeah, she's just generically doing really well right now, honestly, and it's just the same build as before. Like the Imperial Mandate is still solid on her, combined into the Moonstone, into you can go Dawncore or Redemption or whatever you like, really any enchant item. You could do Michael somewhere in there too. One thing I will say, I have tried a couple of games of Echoes of Hylia Nami first item. I didn't really like it that much, to be honest. I feel like in cases where you aren't wanting to chase them, like you're not playing something particularly super aggressive, maybe Echoes of Hylia is slightly better, but I feel like the amount of healing that comes from Echoes of Hylia on Nami specifically isn't great, and generally it's still kind of like Imperial Mandate. If you don't like Imperial Mandate for some reason, then I probably would just advise just going into Moonstone first item and then just go into like a healing, pure healing kind of build. So like Moonstone into like Redemption into a Dawncore kind of build would still be absolutely fine. And now the champion that I think is actually just the strongest this at least at the season at the moment is Milio. Now I would even argue it really doesn't matter what AD carry you're playing with. As long as you're getting yourself into team fight stage, at some point in the game, you're going to be fine. The one thing that you might struggle on if you are looking to play Milio is your Q. So that's a little ball that he throws out that disengages. Just be patient on that, particularly in lane. Don't just chuck that out, because if you chuck it out and you miss, it's going to just open up an opportunity for the enemy to come in and do something to you. It's better to hold it rather than just to use it randomly. The healing on counterfire is generically okay. Obviously, it increases your attack range and anyone inside it, so your AD carry will benefit from that a lot. Pretty nice at applying like Staff of Flowing Water and Ardent if you're going into those items as well. His shield is insanely good, especially in lane. The double charge can be huge at mitigating the burst of assassins, which is kind of what we're talking about. So generally, like, say if an assassin is engaging an AD carry, depending on the distance of the assassin, you're either going to do Q first, or you're going to do like a shield charge in AD carry, then a Q, then another shield charge, just to get the movement speed and try and mitigate any burst if they do finally get to latch on. And if any crowd control happens to yourself or your team, you just press one magical button. Not only does it cleanse all the crowd control to everyone around you, but it also gives them tenacity for a few seconds, which then reduces the duration of crowd control. So like his ult is I would argue the most powerful ult in the entire game. Would I say the entire game? It's quite a claim. I'm thinking like Bard ult could potentially be game changing, but it's a lot harder to apply. I think Milio ult has the potential to be the most game breaking ult in the entire game. If the enemy team is completely relying on like stuns or roots to engage you, or sleeps, because it does he can cleanse the sleeps, and he can cleanse Malzahar ulti as well, but the damage will still come through, but it can unroot them from that. So he has the power to just mitigate so many people's like abilities in one go, and then your team can just collapse back on so easily afterwards because they've been baited to come in, that it's almost stupid, honestly, if I'm going to be honest. And the fact that it heals a little bit on top of it as well is just, I don't know, it just feels completely broken right now. I would be very surprised if he doesn't get nerfed. I'm just going to be completely honest. I think he's just, if there was a tier above this tier, it would just be Milio by himself. I think he's just that broken right now, and I don't know how you nerf him without making him feel like a Yumi. So yeah. That's my thoughts. If you do want to build Milio, do not go Echoes of Hylia first. Just go like Moonstone into secondary generic support item, like whatever you want. Like Ardent is fine. Staff of Flowing Water is fine if you're AP heavy. Michael's is fine too, even though you have a cleanse in your ulti. There's been a couple of cases where I have taken a Michael's just because the enemy team had so much CC. Like for example, like say for example, like the enemy has like an Ashe, and then also they have a bunch of other champions that do crowd control. I wouldn't want to just ult away the Ashe arrow stun, and then have nothing left over for the rest of the fight. So it would be like use Michael's to cleanse the Ashe arrow. So that engage is now just completely nullified. And then when they do try to fully collapse onto it, then it's just like, well, now I've got my AoE mass stun removal / tenacity boost for everybody. That it's just, yeah, it's insane what you can do with Milio. And his disengage is completely, if you get good with his Q, his disengage is better than Janna just because it's harder to read than Janna and it's faster. The hitbox is slightly smaller though than the Janna Q, but like if you get good on Milio Q, it is the best disengage in the game. It really is. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop Bandle tooting Milio's. You know, he's just a great champion. Play him basically, and then watch him get nerfed. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the tier list for the season. This was for overall 26.02, but just generally a big 2026 overview. Don't really think that much is going to change from what I've seen so far and going into the next patch. So everything in tier 1 and tier 2 should be fine for at least, you know, the next month. But yeah, maybe we'll start seeing some enchanters potentially being nerfed and maybe some other stuff being buffed. I would have loved to have like an AP support item for this patch. I really feel like AP supports could use a little bit more loving because the gold cost on those items are like 3,000 gold. I get why Riot doesn't want AP supports necessarily to be strong because AD carries would just cry, but like it feels kind of that a lot of these champions are being kind of like fudged into jungle, like the Morgana, the Zyra, the Brand. Been trying to they're pushing them out of the support role and trying to push them into the jungle. So yeah, I think we're nearing the death now of AP supports in the bot lane. Anyway, all the best, take care. I will be streaming the new patch tomorrow, and expect some more support content over the next few days and weeks and months and years, maybe. Bye bye.